Hey there. Thank you for joining us for this year's Aspen Ideas Climate, a solutions conference bringing together community leaders, business people, elected officials, technologists, and beyond to address head-on how we adapt to a changing climate. My name is Raul Moas, and I serve as the Senior Director here at Knight Foundation. At Knight, we are social investors who support a more effective democracy by funding free expression and journalism, arts and culture and community, research in the areas of media and democracy, and in the success of American cities and towns where the Knight brothers once published newspapers. For all those reasons, I am thrilled to be speaking with Vincent Gonguet, Director of Product Management for Climate at Meta, to discuss designing for civic engagement. Vincent, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Rahul. Looking forward to it.
Vincent, let's start with your role. It's unique. Some folks may wonder why Meta has a product person in a climate role. Many companies are investing in sustainability efforts and making pledges to the same, but your role is different. Can you tell us about your role and how the company came to the decision that it needed a product person and it needed a product team when it came to climate?
Of course. So my role is supporting what we call the climate product team. So you pointed out that a lot of companies are focused on sustainability and kind of the impact of our operations. We do too. And obviously, I don't think my role would exist if there is not kind of a long-standing effort from our sustainability team at Meta over a decade ago that started and now, has been carbon neutral on kind of our core operations, so scope 1 and 2 since 2020, and has been taking those ambitious goal of net zero for our supply chain as well by 2030. And so you can think of the climate product work building off of that, which is beyond the impact of our own operations and our supply chain. What can be the positive impact of our products for climate mitigation? The second aspect is we have at Meta a social impact organization that is focused on kind of designing and amplifying the good that our products can make in the world, focused on a set of key issues that we prioritize as a company. One of them being Civic, another one being our work on COVID and health. And so this is one of those efforts that we have as a company to kind of have a central strategy for how we design for products for those fundamental social issues.
Sure. And so Meta and social platforms as a class design products with the goal ultimately, and among other things, of increasing user engagement, right? So different companies report variations of daily active users, monthly active users, monetizable daily active users. What lessons and design principles from Meta's core services, particularly around meaningful user engagement, are you applying when it comes to climate products? And what of those lessons can others take away from these approaches?
Mm-hmm. So I think when you say designing for engagement, I think perhaps like the outcome we're looking for is kind of meeting people where they are, and ultimately daily active user and time spent or monetization are just reflections of how useful your products are for people. So when you apply this to topics like climate, I think the question becomes, well, how can we make climate a topic that people want to hear about and people want to engage with? And we can talk about maybe some of the lessons that we've seen so far, but there's a challenge with civic issues in general. Is that I mean, civic participation in general in society is not. I don't think it's growing exponentially. And for topics like climate that can tend to feel distant, can tend to be depressing to people if it's not communicated the right way and not in an action-oriented way. It can be challenging to actually have experiences that are engaging for people. And so I think when we think about engagement and designing for engagement for specific social issues, I think we have just the normal challenge of any product, which is making sure those products solve people's problems, but also through the lens of a topic that can feel kind of distant and depressing to too many people, unfortunately, and thus making it even harder to get people to engage in those types of experiences.
You speak about meeting people where they're at, which I think is a great kind of insight, a great lesson across multiple spaces. And so when it comes to climate, what lessons, what insights are you all applying or incorporating into the work when it comes to kind of meeting people where they are, beyond kind of going personas or user archetypes? What have you found is really effective in meeting that kind of that resident, that consumer in where they are in their, let's call it, climate learning journey?
Yeah, well, maybe I can tell you a little bit about what we've learned. So like with any product, when you start, you try to understand your users. And so we run a survey. So we actually partnered with the University of Yale to run a large scale survey in over 30 countries to ask users, what do they think about climate? What are their attitudes toward climate? Across a variety of questions. And the things that we learned is that, over 75% of users, depends on the country, believe in climate change. There's slightly less that believe that it's human caused, but there's this overwhelming majority of people who believe that climate change is a thing. But then we saw an overwhelming number of people, especially, again, it's different for different geographies, but people who want more information about climate. So they kind of feel like they don't really know about the topic. It's complicated. And then when you get into taking action, we also see just like very large percentages of people who are one step away from action. I think in the US for young adults, it's over 30% of people who are just one step away from really getting active into climate action. But then there's lots of barriers toward that. There's lots of mental models that are kind of flawed or incomplete. When you ask people, what are your perceived action, like the perceived effectiveness of various actions? I think number one is recycling, where I think we know that obviously recycling and plastics in general is very important from a sustainability perspective, but from a climate perspective, it's not necessarily what's at the top. And things like collective action, engaging in the political discourse and engaging with your community are things that fall much further down the list. So there is we're seeing kind of the mental model of what are the key solutions is kind of all over the place. And the last thing is kind of sizing the barriers and the motivators. There's lots of different barriers and motivators. It varies based on the types of solutions and the types of actions. It can be things like it's very complicated to install a heat pump at home, and how do I do that? So it can be more practical barriers. For other things, it can be what we call outcome expectancy. Do I think it's going to have an outcome that I can control? So we see that for food waste, for example, people don't really see that it's going to really drive fundamental change. So kind of running this analysis of what people think about climate, do they care? And then, given the overwhelming majority care, then it's how do you get into helping them take the step toward action? Because there's this desire that we're seeing, but many, many barriers in the way, but also a lot of motivators that social media and tech companies in general are well positioned to help address, which is what keeps us motivated.
So this is phenomenal because I was in the Climate Center earlier. I'm kind of browsing around. There's a lot of great information there. I noticed a couple of things. So one is that the information is laid out in a really kind of easy to digest way, in a manner that is let's call it kind of inviting, non-judgmental, but objective, but still allows you to kind of engage in a way that meets you where you're at. The other thing I noticed was that there was no share feature, unlike many other kind of elements of the Meta platforms. How did you all decide kind of first what content to put on there, right? So you're talking about recycling, we're talking about food waste. Did you all do kind of a somewhat of cost benefit analysis, say, hey, these are issue areas where folks are one action item away, and this is where the highest ROI is? And then on the product side, how did you all decide kind of what features to embed that it seems to prioritize personalized learning versus kind of community sharing or engagement?
Yeah, so for everyone, maybe the Climate Science Center is a surface within the Facebook app where we provide a set of information about climate. And so there are different buckets. It's like the causes of climate is a big part, the consequences and the impact that climate change can have. Also the facts and misconceptions that are circulating around climate change, and finally kind of the solutions, or kind of what people and different stakeholders can do about climate. Say that the current product is very focused on causes, consequences, and facts. I think solutions we're still kind of adding more to it, and I think some of the things around involving communities are things that we're actively working towards. I wouldn't quite say that we're not quite there yet, but that's something that we're working toward. But in general, in designing this content, a very big part of the work is engaging with the community of experts. We don't think we should come up with, what are the scientific, the latest consensus on scientific causes. Like, we're very lucky to have, the IPCC and all the IPCC affiliated organizations that we can work directly with to really lay out that content. To your point, there is work that we do on simplification of that content to make it accessible to everyone. Scientific content can tend to be very hard for people to grasp, and so that's some of the work that we do on the content strategy side. And then in terms of sharing, actually, you might be. I can talk to the team about this, because I think we're, maybe we haven't fully rolled it out yet, but we've made it possible that every single snippet of the Climate Science Center content can be kind of distributed by people and shared around.
So it is meant to be used or shared in the way that other content might normally be shared, either on Facebook or other platforms.
Yeah, of course, you can think of it as snippets. I mean, there's been, we're playing around with different ways to embed that content in a way that makes sense. It is, I think, in general, a challenge of, we call it authoritative content, this class of content that we put in the Climate Science Center. So, content that's really informed by experts. The tension, back to your point on designing for engagement, is this content can tend to be dry. It tends to not be the most engaging content that you have when you're competing, with our reels or like our short form video content that can be very engaging. So how do you find the right balance here? We've played around with quizzes, kind of gamification of the experience can be quite powerful. We've seen really good, like very surprising results of how much engagement we see with those quizzes. So we're trying to do a little bit more of that. Then there is a little bit of the news effects of all the latest kind of IPCC reports that we've seen in the last few weeks. We have a team that works on kind of curating that and having specific content for it. We're trying kind of podcast type content for specific events. So we're kind of trying, but threading that needle between not kind of diluting the quality and the authority of the content when you have to deal with complex science at the core, but still making it engaging and meeting people where they are is one of the key challenges of this space. And that's why I think, to me, there's a place for authoritative content and things like the Climate Science Information Center, which will never be kind of fully, it won't be the full spectrum of climate experiences that we build. And there's probably another class of experiences that we need to either build or kind of encourage or empower, which will be more kind of lightweight, perhaps more, maybe less scientific, but more engaging for people. But there's a whole spectrum there.
So speaking of that continuum, speaking of kind of the timeline, the product roadmaps here, the company has been public in saying that this is early. We're really early, and that y'all are really early in this, and it's going to take time to figure out what works best. What does success look like for you in this first phase, however you define that first phase of a few years? What are the wins that you're looking for? And then more importantly, how are you tracking them? How are you tracking changes in either individual behavior or communal behavior because of this intervention?
Yeah, so to your point, I mean, in terms of defining maybe the timelines, we have over a decade of work in sustainability that has led to the net zero program and all those commitments by 2030. We have a couple of years of work on climate products. We've focused a lot of our time on the Climate Science Center. We also have work on the crisis response side, which we think is kind of the table stakes. So table stakes is providing authoritative information about people around the key facts and the key mental models for climate, building on what we've done, for example, for COVID. And then the second part is kind of building the foundations for helping people deal with climate-induced or climate-augmented disasters. So our crisis response products, for example, over the last year, they've been over 75 million people have engaged with our safety check and kind of products for that. So you can think of it as a lot of the foundations, and then a lot of the work that we've done is defining kind of this strategy of what does success look like, and what are we trying to optimize for. And I think a key part of what there are a few words of what we're trying to focus on. One is meaningful impact, and so meaningful impact means measurability. It is very hard to tie some sort of consumption of climate content on a platform to ultimately a CO2 emission. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing in this space. It's one of the main areas of focus of how can we have the right goals and the right metrics to keep ourselves honest internally and also externally share our progress, being as aligned as possible as the way where we should all think as humanity has progressed toward climate mitigation. The second big part of, I think, what is success is kind of what we're calling kind of social infrastructure. And we think, as a company that is really focused on kind of building communications tools at scale and kind of social media in general, is what types of new tools can we build for society to kind of get together and work towards those kind of global challenges. And so we're looking for those different new types of tools that we can build. A lot of our focus right now is on communities. You mentioned, I think earlier that, how do we engage communities and how do we share, to kind of get people into action? We think the big part of the key is in the community scale. You have a space for individual actions. We know individual actions can only go so far. We also know that, country level action and global action can feel kind of distant to people. And so, sweet spot can be really focusing on communities and helping communities, work together and empower them to take climate action, because we're already seeing that they want to do so. And so it's all about us kind of, making it easier to do that.
Vincent, so many social platforms kind of approach their work in terms of product operations and policy, with research kind of informing decisions across the board. Does this hold true for how you all are thinking of climate products? And then what is the research that you are either commissioning or conducting yourselves? What is it leading to in terms of product decisions?
So to your first question, I think we're trying to be as coordinated as we can within Meta. We work very closely with the sustainability team, work very closely with the policy team, the governance, like many different parts of the organization. I think we're quite good as a company to kind of operate those what we call east-west efforts, between different teams, and making sure that we have a solid plan across the board. And to your point, like research and really understanding those types of very complex problems really well is fundamental. We do research in many different areas. I mentioned work on with partners on this kind of Yale survey to understand climate attitudes. We have some of the stats that I mentioned is from work that we do trying to quantify barriers and motivators to climate action. We do a lot of work on measurement and how we actually set up the right measurement tools and frameworks to be able to monitor progress and make sure that we focus on the right things. And then for every single product that we build, obviously we do research to understand what are the problems that we can solve, like kind of traditional product development.
You mentioned the work with Yale and the partnership with Yale a couple of times now, and could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because the work is really interesting because it's with the Yale Center for Climate Communication, and so it's specifically on how we speak about climate change and our roles and responsibilities towards it, adapting towards it. Can you share a little bit more? Because I think if we step back, right, there's kind of product and this technical capacity in the tech stack, and that's kind of on the engineering side. And then there's these decisions we make on design. And so much of those decisions that you're making are about how we speak of this. right? How we speak about its approachability, its actionability. You mentioned earlier this word kind of multiple times around depressing, and that oftentimes it feels like it could be overwhelming or depressing that this is going to happen no matter what we do. And so I'm curious about what that research has uncovered and how that's directly informed the kinds of product you're building.
That's right. So there's a lot to unpack there. But in terms of partnerships, back to Yale, and I should also mention Cambridge and Monash. They're the three universities that we've been working very, very closely with since the inception of the Climate Science Center. Mostly, there's a few other efforts that we're working with them on, including that survey. But working with experts in climate communication is really fundamental. To point, like, one of the climate communication is maybe one of the hardest communication challenges of our times. And obviously, we're content platforms, and so communication is intertwined with pretty much everything that we do. Those are fundamental partners. We work with them, in many different forms. It can be just informative on, we would have a kind of a new product or kind of a new question that we're thinking through and discussing it with them. We might have specific work that we do in co-development with them. So the example of the survey or the Climate Science Center is one, but there are others. In terms of what we find from the research, I think I mentioned some of those different things. I think things around the lack of kind of reliable information, or at least what we're seeing in surveys, that people want more information about climate. There is in general a kind of a lack of conversations in general, and I don't think it's specific to Meta or Facebook, Instagram, or different products. I think in society in general, we don't talk enough about climate, and this is probably one of the keys. I think there's some experts. I think Catherine Hayhoe saying, like, if you want to solve climate, just talk about it. And so I think there is something to say about climate communication and the fact that we're not seeing a lot of conversation. Obviously, it's spiky, when there's COP or Earth Day and Earth Week, a couple of weeks ago. We've seen those spikes of conversations, but in general, we're not talking about it as much as kind of would be reflected in the size and the scale of the challenge. And then we get into questions about why. Like, why are we not talking more about it? And I think we mentioned things like it can feel depressing, it can feel distant, it can feel too complicated. It may not be a priority in the stack of priorities for a lot of people who have a lot of things to think about. And so there's not a silver bullet in I think, addressing the climate communication challenge that we have as a global society. And so I think working through those different barriers to enabling those conversations and how to make those conversations high quality and kind of driving toward climate action is a lot of the work that we're doing and kind of working with partners to kind of make progress on.
Vincent, in the surveying and polling that you've done of Facebook users, Meta platform users, where do you think climate falls in terms of priority? Is it top decile, top quartile, bottom quartile for folks? And what's that distribution across geography?
I'm not quite sure if we've done kind of that stack ranking of issues. So I couldn't mention that. I might not get the stat right, but yeah, I think we've seen. I remember some of the stats on even in the US, if you look at among young adults, kind of below 30 years old, the amount of kind of the level of not just concern but like willingness to act is very high. It's like, I think memory, it's like 28 or 30%, which is much higher than what you would see for other social issues in history. And so in some ways, this is not really a social issue. This is a cause of a generation. And so I think, again, when we think about designing products and we see that just people have this desire to help with what they see as the cause of their generation, there's a question for us on how do we respond to this ask and need and build products that help people do what they already want to do.
So designing for products, designing for engagement, without a doubt, kind of the integrity of the conversation, the integrity of the product and of the facts, which may be somebody else's opinion, but of the facts comes to the forefront. You are in the what I would consider from the outset a thankless role, where you probably have some folks to one side of you who think you're not doing enough. You've got folks to the other side of you who think you're doing way too much to label certain posts with certain labels and tags around climate information. How have you personally and you and your team, professionally as a team, how have you kind of decided and adjudicated the middle ground or the middle line to balance those tensions?
Yeah, so climate misinformation is definitely another one of those table stakes efforts that we take very seriously. We have a long history of addressing misinformation across, kind of in many forms, and climate misinformation is one of the ways misinformation spreads on platforms. And so the main way that we combat misinformation is through our third-party fact-checker program, where really the goal is to be able to help reduce the distribution of false content on the platform, but have this access of truth and really having third parties to help us figure out what is right, what is not right. And it can be challenging for climate where the science can be complicated. And so we've recently announced this climate misinformation grant program where we've worked with the International Fact-Checking Network to develop new research and help build new tools for fact checkers to keep up with the science and keep up with the latest facts. Another part of the way we combat misinformation is to help provide authoritative information, like what I mentioned with the Climate Science Center, providing key, like the kind of snippets of what are the causes, what are the consequences, what are the solutions, what are the facts and what are the myths about climate, and providing that information in a way that's as digestible and as easy to discover as possible, which is why in a set of countries we've rolled out those climate information labels. So when there is a post that is mentioning climate or specific to climate, we have a link so that people can get to the Climate Science Center and see more information about it.
Vincent, what hasn't worked? In other words, for folks who are considering, who are in the business of building, designing for engagement, civic engagement in particular, who are eager to see folks take action based on that engagement, what pitfalls or hard lessons have you and your team learned that others should be mindful of?
So it's still early days, and I think a lot of the barriers that we've seen we're trying to build products against. But I think one of the hardest is how to localize the issue, but make that scalable. So you have this tension between making a product that's very tangible, about how a community can really engage in kind of climate action, for example. So instead of having kind of those distant issues, you would make it very relatable. Like, this is what I can do in my community. This is what I can do, with people that we can relate to, and maybe there's some tips I can share. It's just hard to scale those types of experiences when you're building products. So I think threading the needle between localization and, again, meeting people where they are, which means personalization, but also keeping it scalable so that we can, there is urgency in the clock ticking on climate. So how to thread that needle between the two, I think, is the sweet spot we haven't found. And we're looking, and if there are folks who have ideas and successes that they've seen, definitely would love to talk, because this is definitely not a solved problem for.
And what's the best way to get those with the spirit of Aspen Ideas Climate is a solutions conference. It's meant to engage folks in thinking about the real ways we can adapt, we can change, we can invest in adapting to this changing climate. What's the best way to get those ideas to you?
Well, just email me, V and my last name, gonguet@fb.com. Always happy to hear from the community. I think one of the things that I've been really loving since I started to support climate efforts is just the collaborative nature of the climate space, the climate ecosystem. It's been wonderful to meet with so many experts. Everyone wants to help each other out, which is very encouraging for us to solve this big challenge as a global society.
Vincent, I can't thank you enough for the time and for the insights. If you've dropped some nuggets throughout the conversation that I think are really great. If you could summarize for us the 3 key design principles when it comes to product that anyone who is designing and maximizing and optimizing for engagement, for action, for civic engagement, civic action, the 3 kind of golden rules or 3 principles in design that you think they should keep in mind.
So I'd say 1 is meet people where they are. 2 is measure the impact so that you know what to optimize for. I think the 3rd one that we haven't talked too much about, but figure out what your strengths are. So when your meta is really about social connections, and that's a lot of the lens that we take, but based on your product, you might have a different strength. And so think about that, because this is probably one way to maximize your impact, instead of having to build net new strengths in addition to solving for those very complex social issues in the first place.
Tremendous. Vincent, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Be well.